Hi, this is Professor JPS, and this is a lecture for Communication Arts 205, Mass Media and Popular Culture. This would be a lecture that would have happened tomorrow, April 21st, I think, or no, April 20th, I'm sorry. And it's for Chapter 11, which is cell phone, social media, and the problem of identity. And this evening, we'll go over about half this particular chapter, and then I will have another lecture probably Tuesday night for Wednesday morning, which would be when we would have had the regular class on Wednesday morning, to go over the other half of the chapter. It's not a very lengthy chapter, but it's a chapter I think that is obviously worth going over. Some of the stuff in this particular chapter is to some degree a bit obvious, and some of it is a little bit outdated. But what it really boils down to is to try to make sense of how far we have come with utilization of both the internet and cell phone usage and the prevalence of social media and what social media does and what it is that we do with social media and its possible effects on users of all three of those things. So I want to get right at this particular chapter for this evening. We'll be going over pages 275 to roughly 282. And I want to discuss some of the aspects that Berger gets at in this particular chapter. Okay. At first, he gets to some work that had been done a good 20 years ago at the near beginnings of the social media movement and the movement with cellular telephones. And he looks at something called Vincent Miller's New Media, Networking, and Phatic Culture. Phatic, that's Phatic, Phatic Culture. And this appeared in an international journal, Research into New Media, in 2008, so about a dozen years ago. And he says this, through a consideration of the new media objects of blogs, social networking profiles, and microblogs, along with their associated practices, I will argue that the social context of individualization and network sociality, along with technological developments associated with pervasive communication and connected presence, has led to an online media culture increasingly dominated by phatic communication, Phatic, phatic communication. That is, communications which have purely social, networking, and not informational or dialogic intents. I conclude with a discussion of the potential nihilistic consequences of such a culture. What Miller is talking about there is the idea, in some ways, of what you're already aware of and you've probably been living with since you were allowed to have a cell phone. And I think what your generation calls it is fear of losing out or fear of missing out. And the consistent and constant connectivity that a cell phone allows or a computer allows, and the social networking systems and platforms that we're all interested in, except of course me, because I'm just a weirdo, means that there's a constant need to be checking on something that's been digitally created and digitally maintained, but does not necessarily exist in the real world. He goes on to discuss this notion of what phatic communication means by bringing up a noted anthropologist. In discussing Bronislaw Malinowski's ideas about phatic communication, stereotype phrases, which nevertheless offer important social benefits, are found in one form or another in speech communities around the world. As the anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski pointed out a half a century ago, he gave the name phatic communication. derived from Greek and Latin, and their words mean verbal togetherness. Phatic communication means literally verbal togetherness. To speech that is used as social cement, as he defined it, as a type of speech in which the ties of union are created by a mere exchange of words. Malinowski was talking about this idea of phatic communication, meaning that people were tied together by words, just verbal togetherness. In terms of how Berger is trying to demonstrate the use of phatic communication, is saying that the consistency by which people are constantly texting or constantly checking their status on various social media accounts, or constantly checking to see what's happening in the Instagram world or the Facebook world or the Twitter world, and their relationship to it, is a kind of phatic communication. It's communication that's not really offering much information other than to be heard and to be seen and to be counted. Again, this notion of fear of missing out. Phatic communication is communication is not necessary, but is constantly done. And that's what they're trying to get at here by bringing in Malinowski's notion of phatic communication. At the bottom of 275, the question is, if teenagers send each other 100 text messages a day, can their messages be seen as anything other than phatic communication? I think you'd have to answer that question yourselves, whether or not the amount of times you're on your cell phone communicating with people, whether or not all of those communications are necessary or not. Maybe they are. Maybe they are in your mind. I don't know. So they go on to talk a little bit about this idea of how this got started and how the ubiquity and pervasiveness of cellular telephones really started to change people's habits in terms of their everyday life experience. And Berger goes on to talk about how some other figures in mass communication research and other areas started to notice 20 years ago or so how the habitual cell phone user were really changing behavior in terms of how it is that they were using their cell phones, not just to communicate like a phone used to send a message or to inform somebody, but as daily practice, daily routine, minute practice, minute by minute practice. And he goes on to talk about an epiphany that a futurist called Howard Rheingold had when he was doing his book called Smart Mobs, The Next Social Revolution. And he quotes, "I began to notice people on the streets of Tokyo staring at their mobile phones instead of talking in them. The sight of this behavior, now commonplace in much of the world, triggered a sensation I experienced a few times before. The instant recognition that technology was going to change my life in ways I could scarcely imagine." Now, that was some 17 years ago. Some of these points that textbooks will lag behind a little bit because they're trying to assess how this stuff started and changed and the way people change their behavior. You may not even give it a second thought because you've been behaving this way probably since about 5th or 6th grade, utilizing your cell phone to constantly check in with the world, that the world around you is not the real world. The world that exists for your generation and in much of contemporary generation is you have to be plugged in first using your cell phone or perhaps your computer, right? You're checking what's there instead of what's in front of you, right? Everyday life is secondary to the digital life that we've all come to accustom, and to find stuff there and to find our own participation, our own song to sing, so to speak, in the digital realm. And that's what this chapter is trying to get at in terms of the larger question of identity, and tapping into some of the issues we discussed in the first 4 chapters in terms of semiotics, psychoanalytic theory, Marxism, and sociological theory. Social media and cell phone use on social media, there's plenty of those information in those particular chapters that can connect to the idea of the habitual use of cellular cell phones and the digital realm. and how that's changed. How it's changed society, not only economically, but just changed people's sense of themselves, right? And what it is that they're after and what it is that they're interested in being. What he was seeing was texting, a phenomenon that has grown exponentially and now plays a major role in everyday activities of people who have cell phones, and is particularly important for reasons that will be discussed shortly in the lives of teenagers. Now, of course, this is ridiculously obvious, and I think in the next version of this textbook, you will leave out this particular page because it's too obvious to be even discussed. But it is a starting point for academics to get a sense of how the notion of identity through cellular telephone use with the internet changed. Then they go on to explain the largeness, the giganticism of the internet itself and the World Wide Web itself, and for all the wonderful advantages that the World Wide Web has and the internet, some of the downsides, some of the things that we have to be more judicious about in terms of understanding the power and breadth and scope of how the internet can work. He goes on 276 and 277, Berger does, to talk about the power of the internet. And he says, he quotes Reingold again from about 8 years ago. Mass collaboration has transformed not only the way people use the internet, but how the information is found. Knowledge is aggregated, science is conducted, software is created, production of the free Linux operating system in Firefox, the second most popular web browser. Computing power is harnessed for research. Entertained. People are entertained. Problems are solved. Disaster relief is delivered. Communities are formed. Commercial products are designed and tested. It isn't easy to think of a realm of human behavior that has not been influenced in some way by some form of mass collaboration. Although much of human culture, defined as everything we learn from and teach to one another, is transmitted through ancient institutions such as education and publishing, the techniques and social forms that made mass collaboration possible on a scale we see today has become available to billions of people in less than the span of a single generation. The web dates from 1989, Wikipedia dates from 2001, and Facebook dates from 2005. So what they're saying there, again, is to some degree some obvious points, that there's a lot of transformation that the internet is responsible for, that the World Wide Web is responsible for. And there's a lot of power for good in the overall atmosphere of the internet. And again, you guys are 19, 20 years old. This is pretty basic for you. It's second nature. You've grown up with the internet. You've grown up with the World Wide Web. You've grown up with the changing forces in technology. There hasn't even been much of an adaptation for you. But just a gentle reminder, there were things before the internet and there will be things after the internet. And this particular chapter tries to at least get at the notion of how the internet has changed human behavior and how cell phones have changed human behavior and how the combination of that ease of digital transformation has also changed people's sense of their own identities. That's kind of what this chapter is talking about. Okay, so now some of the less favorable aspects of the giganticism and pervasiveness of the overall internet or World Wide Web. There's no question about the positive potentialities of the internet, which we all experience with our use of email and millions of applications that enable us to do all kinds of remarkable things. But the internet is a two-sided sword, and there are many negative aspects of internet use. Some of these are spelled out by philosopher Herbert Dreyfus in his book on the internet. Herbert Dreyfus says, the research examined the social and psychological impact of the internet on 169 people in 73 households during the first 1 or 2 years online. In this sample, the internet was used extensively for communication. Nonetheless, the greater use of the internet was associated with declines in participants' communication with family members in the household, decline in the size of their social circle, and increases in depression and loneliness. Online friendships are likely to be more limited than friendships supported by physical proximity. Because online friends are not embedded in the same day-to-day environment, they were less likely to understand the context for conversation, making discussion more difficult and rendering them less applicable. So that's just a fancy way of saying even though the internet is very, very powerful and very, very sort of easy to attain or jump into or utilize, it also provides a kind of alienation and isolation, and that there's less actual communication that's one-on-one with either friends or family members, or actual real people, right? There's a digital friendship, a digital sensibility that people have become accustomed to counting on. And that is a little odd in terms of people's sense of their own identity. Berger goes on, we may be able to maintain strong ties at a distance through electronic communication, but they are likely to be different kind and perhaps diminished in strength compared with strong ties supported by the physical, that is, face-to-face proximity. Many social scientists argue that people are losing the ability to converse with one another because they're so used to one-way electronic communication through text and email messages, and find themselves, as Sherry Turkle, professor at MIT, puts it during an interview on Fresh Air, alone together. There's a great coincidence given that right now, because of COVID, we are all experiencing this idea of alone together, and thank God there is the internet, and thank God there's digital realms of communication to allow us to do this. However, it's still worth saying that even without COVID-19, I think there's been a great dependence upon the utilization of digital realities rather than actual realities, as we discussed a little bit before with video games and their very, very, very surprising level of success. We find now that people use the internet to shame others, to bully others, to invade the privacy of the others, and to steal information from others. The 2016 presidential election, in which Russian hackers commanded to do so by Russian President Vladimir Putin, according to our intelligence agencies, stole information from the Democratic Party files and other Democratic operatives. The Russians used it via WikiLeaks and other sites to attack American democracy, American democratic processes, and Hillary Clinton. This was one of the most notorious examples of how countries can use the internet in various forms of cyber warfare. So, that's probably the most updated thing in this textbook from just a couple of years ago. The idea that the internet certainly was pivotal in the 2016 election for Mr. Trump, and all of our intelligence agencies did say that Russian actors were responsible for many of the manipulations that happened through Facebook bots and Cambridge Analytica, and the ways in which the Russians tapped into the Democratic Party national headquarters information and gave it to WikiLeaks to then embarrass the Democrats. So yes, the internet is good, and the internet is also not so good. And there's something to keep in mind in terms of how it is that we utilize the internet and promote our own sense of ourselves. In the next bit of the chapter, Berger talks about just media usage. He lists two interesting charts in terms of media use by 8 to 18-year-olds and media use in general as of 2016. And interestingly, television still takes up more time than cell phone use, which surprised me a little bit. There's some interesting Kaiser Family Foundation studies from about 10 years ago that talks about 8 to 18-year-old uses. It's on page 278 and 279. 4.29 hours a day watching TV, 2.31 music and other audio, 1.29 computer use, 1.13 playing video games, 0.38 reading, 0.25 movies, 10.45 total. So watching television as of just a handful of years ago was still pretty prevalent, still very popular, but phone and computer usage was on the rise. And the same stuff from about 3 years ago for the entire audience, that 4 hours a day watching television, 3 hours a day cell phone use, 2 hours a day online, 1.47 hours on radio. Now they've split up the online between the phone and the computer. Now whether or not that would be the same thing, those two things combined are more than television. Those two things combined are 5.2 hours. And they make an interesting point in terms of the use of cell phones and the use of computers, really diminishing previous forms of communication like radio and certainly newspapers and magazines, and coming in a little bit more on television as the country moves forward. But in terms of information, certainly fewer and fewer people are getting their information from newspapers. People are still getting some information from television, but your generation is really getting your news sources clicked into your phone and your apps to the particular social media sites that you're intrigued by and interested in. So that information is over on 278 and 279. Okay. Then they get to social media. Social media, which is, obviously, just like we discussed the aspects of video games, social media is huge. It's been transformative these last 15 years, how much people use social media, how they get their news on social media, how they are connected to so many other people on social media, how they absorb their own forms of popular culture and their favorite celebrities on social media. It's transformative in the past 15 years. The general notion that Berger gets to is to try to show that, of course, this has changed in the past 15 years, that it's very, very powerful. Of course, you know this. You engage in social media all the time. But the larger question that Berger is trying to get to is, what does it mean for our own sense of ourselves? How has social media transformed the way in which we represent ourselves, and whether or not that mere representation of ourselves and what we think of ourselves is problematic, or is possibly problematic for the future sense of one's own identity. That's kind of what they're getting at. So let's talk a little bit about what Berger's saying on page 280 and 281. Okay. Most of this information you already understand because you've lived through it, right? I think where we get to this idea of identity is really what we're trying to look at. So he says right in the middle of the page 281, the term social media, as I understand it, refers to sites such as Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube that enable people to send messages, images, and videos that large numbers of people can read or see. These social media sites can be accessed on the internet by computers, tablets, and cell phones. In the passage we find at the beginning of the chapter, Vincent Miller says that much of communication we do through social media is phatic. These messages, sometimes called small talk, are not to communicate information as much as indication we are present. Phatic communication, as Malinowski pointed out, is a form of verbal togetherness. The huge numbers of texted messages we send one another are caused more by a need to maintain our network of friends and consolidate our togetherness with one another than by the desire to convey information. Now, we can always justify the idea of a text as conveying information, but the difference between texting friends or texting people many dozens and dozens times a day and actually conveying information, it seems to me, is kind of vast, right? I mean, think about, there's no way you could do that on a telephone years ago before texting, right? Other people would need to use the phone, or you just would be tired of talking for that long. And mainly because the phone was there to convey information. Now people will talk, and sometimes people talk for a long time, but it's not the same. I mean, I think that when you have the cell phone and you're just constantly texting, it's as if you're putting effort into not just communicating information, but to mark your territory that you exist. Like cavemen ultimately drew on cave walls just to show the world that they could express themselves, right? And there's something about that, this idea of fear of missing out, making sure that you're actually being heard rather than conveying information, is what they're getting at in terms of this idea of phatic communication. It's communication for communication's sake. It's not communication that's necessarily necessary or needed, okay? That's on 281. And then they go on to talk about how social media has transformed this particular idea. Members of all age groups are involved in social media, though elderly adults do not participate in social media to the extent that younger people, middle-aged people do. To help illustrate on a personal note, when I was in Japan a few years ago, I made short videos. Oh, that's not important. Okay. So still, you can't deny the power and fun and entertainment and feeling of accomplishment with social media. Okay. I don't mean to just crap all over social media. It's not my intent here. I'm just trying to get at this idea of identity. The fact that YouTube has millions of people accessing its videos, that people are sending billions of tweets a year, and that Facebook now has 1 billion members demand the attention of media communication scholars. If social media are that popular, they must be doing something important for all the people who use them. An Australian psychiatrist, David Brunskill, wrote an important article about Facebook titled Social Media, Social Avatars, and the Psyche. Is Facebook Good for Us?, which appeared in Australian Psychiatry about 7 years ago. In this article, Brunskill warns that using Facebook has considerable impact on our psyches. He's interested in the way social media users represent themselves online and on the impact of using Facebook on people who post on Facebook and other social media. So this Australian dude is trying to get at this idea what makes Facebook so popular, what makes it tick, why do its users are so interested in it. And he says, inherent to the experience of using social media is the self-selection of favorable material to represent the individual. This process is cumulative and effectively creates a socially derived and socially driven composite online image, a social avatar. Humans notably select their best aspects for presentation to others, and the social avatar reflects this tendency, effectively facilitating the creation of a gap between online image, which is representation, and offline identity, which is substance, the real thing. The creation of a social avatar should therefore be an important and conscious consideration for all users of social media, not just those individuals already struggling with the task of integrating the multiple facets which make up modern personal identity. Social avatars appear to be an important factor in understanding the inherent potential for social media to affect the psyche and contribute to psychopathology within the individual. It has been proposed that 5 psychological forces, grandiosity, narcissism, darkness, regression, and impulsivity, vie to assert themselves as the material from which the E-personality is built, and that they, in the 21st century confirmation of Freudian id, cause a transformation or fracture in personality known as the net effect. What that large piece of that book is trying to get at is to say that there's actual reality, right? That you live in, that I live in, and that the reality that we live in, we have to eat and sleep and go to the bathroom and brush our teeth and do some exercise and make sure that we're not, killing ourselves, and we work jobs, and we have social relationships with friends, and we have social relationships with our parents, and we have relationships with people in the real world, and that we have boyfriends and girlfriends and what have you, right? And we may, use our fake IDs and go to bars and socialize and live in a real world. And so much in the last decade or so of that adjacent real world is the online world, is the social media platform world. And in that world, there's so much energy that's put into creating our second self, our social avatar, our digital being, our Facebook page, our Instagram page, our Twitter persona, that what these guys are saying is that is an interesting sociological phenomenon. Besides the technical phenomenon of being able to order on Amazon or go to YouTube to find an interesting video or to just check in with friends, it's not just utility anymore, and it hasn't been for a long time. In other words, if we're to say that YouTube has utility, that it's fun, that it's interesting, and there's a lot of information we can find there, right? Or if we can say that being on Facebook is fun because I get to, see old friends from high school or whatever. There's a certain utility, right? It works to do that. But certainly it doesn't just stop there, right? Certainly we go to our Facebook pages or our Instagram pages to consistently and constantly make ourselves some sort of persona that's slightly different than the one that's sitting on the couch in our sweatpants watching, Real Housewives of Beverly Hills or whatever, right? We all have strengths and weaknesses, but our social avatars seem to have become almost a replacement for our own identities. Now, in a normal classroom time, I would talk to students and ask them about their own social avatars and social identities, what it's like to put stuff on Instagram and what it is like to have Facebook conversations, and what your own persona is like on Facebook, and whether or not you feel it's different or not from your actual real persona, or if you have friends that are like that, or if you've gone from being a kind of teenager to a maybe somebody who's 20 or 21 or 22, and you've seen maybe some changes in just the overall ways in which your generation changes with your own social media platforms. But we don't have that ability to do that, and unless my students are going to send me emails saying that that's the case, right? I myself, I've never been interested in social media platforms. I call people on the telephone and see how they're doing, right? I may send them a text from time to time to see how they're doing, but that's just the first part. I've never been on Facebook. I don't have a Facebook page at all. I never once utilized Facebook in any capacity whatsoever. I don't have an Instagram account. I go to Twitter for political writers, but I'm not on Twitter. I don't have a Twitter identity. I don't have a Twitter handle. Now, again, I'm not saying that that's just because I'm an old fart and a little bit lazy. But what I'm getting at is there is a difference between your own three-dimensional, living, breathing human person and your social media version of yourself. And I think one has to be kind of careful to not confuse those two things, to try to be as real as possible on your social media platforms, because then you're going to start living a kind of weird dual reality that will wreak havoc with one's own identity. And I think that that's what they're getting at in terms of the possible, if not overt problems, but curious ideas of unintended consequences of social media. It's so personal, right? It's the epitome of personal. It's the absolute definition of personal. And you want that personal to be out there in the digital world, and you want people to notice you. And there's something a little curious about that, because it sort of takes away from your own sense of your own three-dimensional, regular working self, regular thinking self, regular social self. I'd be very curious, because I've had discussions with students in the past who've told me they've lost friendships that they had in real life because of their social media friendships became difficult or weird, or somebody used to be really close to a friend in actual life, but their sense of their social media sensibilities clashed. And I found that to be very interesting. And I think that that's what these guys are getting at in this first part of chapter 1, in terms of cell phone use, computer use, internet use, and the overall idea of identity. That's really what they're trying to get at. Much of the points in here are relatively obvious. You've already lived this, the idea of social media, of course, cell phone use, of course, texting, internet, of course, this is pretty obvious stuff. But the idea of the social avatar being different than your own personal, actual personal being, that's, I think, what they're trying to get at. And then the rest of the chapter deals with some other things to think about in terms of social media and identity that harken back to the first 4 chapters we were discussing earlier. Okay? So this particular lecture ends for this evening. We ended up on page 282. Tuesday evening of this week, I'll be sending out another lecture, which would be for this coming Wednesday, which will finish off this particular chapter. And then I think we only have one more chapter to go through before we start doing class presentations. So double check your syllabi, and on Wednesday I will double check my syllabi.
And we'll do that class presentation thing again, and then we'll have a final exam sometime during finals week. And I will try to get that information to you as we move along, because it's already April 20th, right? So a couple of things. Again, I hope everyone is safe. I've had a handful of students who have been afflicted with COVID. Most of them, I think, are doing well, and I've had a handful of other students whose families have been affected by COVID. My heart and prayers go out to all of the families. Please be diligent. Do not kid around. Do not think you're not going to get it. I think you know this by now. I think that the young people really understand that anybody can get it, and it's a really, really tough sickness. I mean, it can be deadly, as you know. I mean, over 1,000 people in Connecticut have died. Hopefully, we're bending the curve. Hopefully, we're doing the best we can. I think we are bending the curve. I think social distancing is important, and it's working. But things will not be normal for a while. I think you're getting that understanding. So don't give up now, and don't let up now, is what I mean to say. Also, please don't forget about pre-registration for the fall semester. It's very important that you pre-register for classes for the fall semester. I am here. Please email me. Please email me. Let me know. Speaking specifically for myself, I think a number of you already had a lot of the classes I'm going to be teaching in the fall, but maybe some of you haven't. If you're interested, I'm teaching, well, MassComm 101, but most of you have had MassComm 101. I'm also teaching 2 film studies courses. One is called Communication Arts 157, American Film. And that is a class in all independent cinema, and it's Tuesdays only from 1 to 4:15. I talk, we watch a movie, then we talk a little bit about after that, okay? That's Communication Arts 157, American Film. Not American Film Heritage, that's a 200 level class. This is a 100 level class. And it's all indie cinema, 1 to 4:15 on Tuesdays only. The other film studies course is Communication Arts 256, Focus on the Director. That's a course in auteur theory, or famous movie makers over the years. That's on Thursdays, 1 to 4:15, once a week, okay? That's a 200 level class. You may need some 200 level classes this coming semester in the fall. Also, just in terms of our department, there are various film and TV production courses that are being offered in the TV studio. And there's 3 journalism courses being offered in the fall. If you are a journalism person, or if you need a 200 level writing class, which many of you will probably need, there are 3 courses being offered in the fall. Well, one is 100 level journalism. The other one is COM 215 media writing, with a terrific teacher, a woman from New Canaan who works for Bloomberg News. Wonderful teacher, really good gal, very helpful to students. And then there's digital journalism, which is a course that's helps with the newfangled aspects of digital journalism, and that's Tuesday evenings once a week, okay? So if you're a communication arts major and you're looking for like 2 classes on one day, you could take COM 157 from 1 to 4:15, and then COM 221, digital journalism at night, and then you got 2 once-a-week classes done in one day, okay? Anyway, I don't know what's going to be happening for the fall. I hope and pray we're all back in the classroom. I don't know for 100% sure. I have no idea what the economy is going to be like, but I would bet that there's going to be students who are right now at, UConn or WestConn or what have you, or Southern, or even some like richer schools like Wesleyan or I don't know, Connecticut College or something. That I'm willing to bet some of their parents are going to say, you're going to go to NCC for a year. The economy is too screwed up. So who knows? I mean, there could be many more students. Or there could be fewer students. Maybe students are going to take gap year. I really don't know. But it is important for you, for me, for all of us, that we don't forget about pre-registration. Please email me. Let me know that you're interested in finding out what courses you would need for the fall semester. Also, I'm teaching a summer film studies course. I'm teaching a summer film studies course, and it's one of the same film studies courses that I'm teaching in the fall. The summer film studies course is COM 256. Now, normally I sell this class
quite a bit while I see you in the classroom, and I tell you that I buy bagels and donuts for people on Thursdays. I can't do that this summer because it's already been stipulated that all summer courses are going to remain online. And it looks like I have to learn Blackboard, which I've never really fully learned. And it looks as though the films you'd have to see on your own in some capacity. So, I'm holding out hope that students want to take the class. I don't know. So far, no one's taken it, but it's only April. But that's being offered. It's being offered both in the summer and in the fall. Okay, so, but you need to know what classes you need. If you need your English 102, if you need your maths, your sciences, your liberal arts electives, whatever. So on your own time, the best thing you can do is look for your transcripts and or your degree evaluations, which is you can find that out all online. And if you want to send me your degree evaluations in an email, like a picture or take a picture or whatever, I'd be happy to go over it with you. Okay, I would do advising all the time anyway, so please keep that in mind. It's very important. Okay, so do understand that soon we're going to have to do class presentations, and I'm not sure how I'm going to choose people to do them. Maybe I'll just tell them they're all due by one date, and that'll be it. And if last time we had a batting order of people doing presentations, and I still haven't gotten them all. They were due 2 weeks ago, actually longer ago than that. So just do your best to stay up with the information as best as possible. Send me any questions as an email if this isn't making any sense to you. I tried my best to make sure that the pages are mentioned in every lecture, and that I filter out what's not there. I filter out what I don't think is important, and I add what I think is important, okay? And most of all, stay safe. I will speak to you again Tuesday night for a Wednesday lecture, okay? Have a good one. Take care. Stay safe.